Here with Dynasty Owner. The double team breakdown. We're also going to go through my tight end rankings, my national top 10. So stick with this video as well, give you a little more in-depth breakdown. So let's jump straight into it. Today we're going to be talking about tight end. As always, my rankings are reflective of value, not just a single season. So these aren't just 2021 rankings. These include, multiple years out. I try to look about 3-4 years out. Realistically, I know, we try to look out for dynasty, a decade long or even longer than that, but sometimes that's impractical. What I'd really try to look at 3-4 years, if that's how long the contract is, and see how to get from that contract. A good frame point to reference is, Travis Kelce is going to go number one in almost every redraft. Probably going to be the number one tight end this year. And that's where it differs from Dynasty Owner because his salary is almost the top of tight ends. So you have to balance that value on where you want to draft it and when you think. Let me share my screen with you so we can go ahead and show you some rankings while we're doing this. So this is my top 10 tight ends in Dynasty Owner. And we'll go through them one at a time. So as you can see, obviously number one is Darren Waller for a few reasons. So he's projected to produce pretty close to what Kelce is. Let's see what that has in projected 1 and 2 finished. Kelce 1, Waller finished last year. So I would agree with that. I think there's a chance Waller jumps up in spot, but I think it's more likely if I had to bet, I'd put my money on Kelce. It's also interesting to note is that Kyle Pitts, we'll talk about him a little bit later, but Kyle Pitts costs more money than Darren Waller does. So it's interesting how that's just a combination of a perfect storm. Kyle Pitts was the tight end 4 overall in the 2021 draft, so it's going to raise his salary quite a bit. And the highest drafted tight end in NFL history, so I'm sure a lot of you knew that, but little fun fact, no tight end has ever been drafted higher. And so the other part is the fact that Waller only played 22 games in his first 3 NFL seasons. So it's fair to say that he was a late bloomer. And I talked about this a little earlier on in the year. I think it was my Rams article. I talked about how there was a contract sweet spot that players fall into. And I think I compared Robert Woods to the same type of thing. So let me read you the quote that I had from the article back then. It said, Woods is in what I would call the second contract sweet spot. So he's old enough to have made it past his first contract, but he's not so productive that his first contract that he demanded top-tier wide receiver money. And much like Devontae Parker, he broke out late. So that's true. It's true about both of those. It's true about Devontae Woods. And it's true of Waller. If you just substitute the tight end instead of wide receiver in there and switch the names around. Waller should be making Kittle and Kelce money. There's no doubt about it. I don't think anybody would argue that. And that'd be right around $15 million per year. And unfortunately, good for dynasty owners because we're getting a steal, is that it's just kind of the way his contracts worked out in the years and his production. It's obviously a new us, which allowed that to happen, but he's on a steal of a deal, and it has to do with those kind of unproductive years that he had to start his career. Suffice it to say, I'm drafting Darren Waller number 1 tight end in my dynasty or startup if I'm doing one. Kind of a no-brainer for me. I wouldn't argue with you if you pick Kelce, but I think that the half of the salary that you're saving for Waller is well worth it. So talking about Kelce, like I said, he finishes the tight end 1 in 2020. I expect the same result in 2021. I think Killer Waller takes over, but if I'm placing my money right now, I'm putting it on Kelce. What's interesting is that in redraft is that Kelce's in a very defined tier by himself. I think Waller's starting to creep up there. Kittle maybe, the injuries are a concern, but for sure those top 3 are in a tier above the rest. And I didn't put in my article, I'm hesitant to even say it because it doesn't really make much sense. But the way I thought of it is like Kittle, Kelce, Waller, tier 1. And then you almost skip a tier. You skip tier 2, and then everybody else is in tier 3. You got your Mark Andrews, and it's probably going to be your Kyle Pitts to start the season, players like that. But it's interesting how far ahead those players are, those tight ends are, from the rest of the field. So like I said, I think that my tight end 4, Pitts, has a chance to break into the top 3, but there's no way that we're gonna be able to predict that, especially in his first season. About George Kittle, several speed bumps in 2020 season. Knee injury in week 1. He's going to miss 2 games. And then he missed 6 games from week 9 to week 15 with a broken bone in his foot. I'm sure everybody remembers that, especially if he owned him. So it's a little harder to analyze. We have to go on average points per game for Kittle because he just was unable to have more than half a season, completed. But in 2020, he had 15.6 fantasy points per game. And only 2 tight ends produced more. I'm sure you can guess who they are. They're the 2 tight ends I already talked about. Fantasy points per game might be a little skewed just for the fact that Kittle was no doubt playing injured, but I think that's true about almost every player, especially tight ends. I mean, really every player takes contact, especially tight ends, running backs. They're injured most of the season. Most of the players are. So it's kind of a cop-out to say that, this tight end was dealing with injury and the other one wasn't. So I'll try to stay from that. But if Kittle is healthy, he's a lock for top 5 fantasy points. Definitely top 10. Most likely top 5 fantasy points for a tight end. And then coming to number 4, I already alluded to it, Kyle Pitts. I was reluctant to put him at the first spot just because he hasn't played a snap in the NFL yet. But his talent, his athleticism is what really puts him over the edge. And it's the yearning for, how do I say, some sort of bright spot in this tight end market. I mean, it's just been not terrible, but so mediocre for these tight ends that you have your top 3, and I think that Pitts will end up being number 4 at the end. But man, he's got a long way to get there, especially in his first season. So he has so much potential. Also, the fact that he's going to retain his rookie contract for 4 years. So even if it takes him a little while to break out, he still have those other 3 seasons after this one on a cheaper contract. He's kind of right in the middle for tight ends, especially since he's so high. But it's not the cheapest tight end contract in the world. But with his talent, I think he will still be a value at number 4. Next, we have Mark Andrews. I loved Mark Andrews last year. I still like him this year. There's some concerns for sure. First concern is that he only has 1 more year on his contract. So steal of a contract. Let me go back up here and see what he's making. Yeah, so he's making $863,000. That's just a steal of a contract, especially for a player for his talent. Concern, as I mentioned, only 1 year left. Second concern, which is probably the bigger one, is that he finished 2020 with 58 receptions. So he missed 2 games, so those are maybe a little bit downgraded. Maybe give him 70. Not terrible, but it's not great for what you want out of a tight end, especially if you're taking him early, especially if you're going to think about taking him above a player like Kittle or Kelsey, which I wouldn't, as you already see. I would predict that every tight end on this list is going to have more than 58 receptions. So hopefully Andrews can find some more targets, find some more receptions. Hopefully he can get to 70 or 80. I don't know. He's not going to get to 100. I'd be happy to roster him, but with that low ceiling on his targets and receptions, just because the Ravens don't pass very much, I would be hard pressed to take him any higher than that. Up next, T.J. Hawkinson. He finished as tight end 3 last year in Dynasty Owner. Tough to believe. It is worth noting, however, that tight end 3 had more than 100 points less than tight end 2. So you can kind of see where that tier break happens, and it happens quick. So second part of my breakdown, kind of broke down Darren Waller already, but I'm going to talk about Noah Fant because he's from the Broncos. So Fant ranks as my tight end 7. A lot to do with his salary. Number 1 tight end on the year, just because I don't try to love the value, but the production probably is going to get it done. If you go into the 2021 season with him as your tight end 1, your top starting tight end, you're going to have a tough time overcoming the Kelsey and the Kittles and the Waller owners. You're going to be losing that position more often than not, week in and week out. But what you could do is, you save him, you take him early, take him as an earlier pick, I should say, and it allows you to take a chance on more risky, expensive tight end later, like Rob Gronkowski, Tyler Higbee, Hunter Henry, all players who, I don't know if I project them to outscore Fant, but they could, if things break right for them. So it's kind of a yin and yang, give and take, with saving early, cheap contract, and then spending late on I don't want to say breakout because all those tight ends I mentioned are older, but on a tight end that could surprise. Let's just put it that way. So I love Fant as a value, temper expectations. You pretty much all know that. So then running out the rankings, we have Irv Smith Jr., Mike Gesicki, and Dallas Goedert, and they're all ranked in that order. All younger guys, younger-ish guys, as Irv Smith Jr. So he has one more year left on his rookie contract than the other two. So Irv Smith Jr. has 2 years left. Gesicki and Goddard have 1 year left. And that's just the reason I ranked them higher. I also think it's pretty likely that Smith Jr. is going to outscore both of those players in this next season, 2021 season. So we saw bursts of excellence with Irv Smith Jr. last year, 2 touchdown games, which a little fluky, I get it, touchdowns. But the fact that they're willing to give it to him in the end zone, red zone, 10 zone is it's encouraging. It's definitely not hurting his chances. Regardless, that wraps up my top 10. Before I stop, I wanted to drop a few names, which I didn't really do with my other articles. But so these are 3 tight ends that I don't know if I wanted them to get in my top 10, especially one if I wanted to creep them in my top 10. Just didn't work out with how the players set it out. But these are all players who, I'll put it this way, I wouldn't be surprised if all 3 of them or any of them make my top 10 next year. So at the start of the 2022 offseason, these 3 players do enough to break out into the top 10 next year. And they are Blake Jarwin, terrible injury last year. I think a lot of potential on that Cowboys team. Adam Trout, but hopefully with that vacancy now New Orleans, he can show off. Cole Kmet, obviously a lot of talent there. Still 3 years left on his contract as well. So that ends all my rankings. That ends this series. We did all four positions. We're finished with this division. So next week we're going to start a new division. I believe we're going to be talking about the Minnesota Vikings. So get forward to hearing about the NFC North for the rest of the month of July. I think that's it. I'd appreciate it if you all, follow me on Twitter, follow Dynasty Owner on Twitter at Dynasty Owner, and then go ahead and subscribe on YouTube to Dynasty Owner as well. You can catch all these videos, get alerts whenever they pop up. That's all I want to talk to you all. I hope everyone stays safe and take care.